Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good ever what time of day you happen to be listening to the Tattoo Tea podcast. On this episode, I have the amazing Doug Broadbent. Now, Doug and I worked together years ago. So we've known each other since, well, we were both a lot younger, and so were our children, and we were just reminiscing about that prior to pressing record. But a little bit about Doug's professional career. Now, he was a teaching assistant back in 2001 in Vancouver. He's been the head of Christian Studies at Trinity Grammar School, where we both worked together. A reviewer of teaching practice. Well, we'll have to get into that one in the UK. The head of Christian Studies and Studies of Religion at Heshare, Director of Teaching and Learning at Thomas Hassell Anglican College, Head of Teaching and Learning at Meriden, and now is the Acting Head of Teaching and Learning at the Shaw School. Doug, that is a career, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Phil. And it is interesting to see we've both been dyeing our hair grey to have that George Clooney vibe about us. Nicely played. We'll have to discuss which shade of platinum we've all gone for. But yeah, it is interesting to look back on a career.
Oh, look, looking at what you've covered over the years, Doug. So in the space of, and let's start way back when, the teaching assistant. So back in 2000. So we're talking a career in education of 25 years. You've covered a lot in that 25 years. Why education? From everything that I look at and what you've completed and what you've done in schools, these skills would translate very well into business organization. Why choose education?
Oh, look, I actually find young people really interesting. I like ideas. I like thoughts. But I also quite like young people. And I've met teachers that like ideas. They love history, they love maths, they love science, but they're not really like kids. And I think that you might have met those teachers, the one who, is frustrated that you don't share their passion for whatever they're into at the moment. And I think a good teacher, or at least a teacher who can last in the profession, is one who both loves history, in my case, or theology, but also loves the kids. And if you can put those two things together, I think there you've got a career, and that's what happened for me.
Yeah, I think you. The key thing is you've got to love young people. You've got to want to invest into them as much as they try and put up the firewall to stop that investment.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you've got to feel like that you can, look, any job really, you've got to feel like that you can do something meaningful. In our cases, something meaningful involves the lives of teenagers. And if you think that, you've got something to give and the skills and the opportunity to do that, then that's a wonderful career opportunity to take. And, full credit to those people who make the widgets out there, but I'm not particularly good at that. So, yeah, that's not the thing that I ended up doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, much the same. Like I was, school was a social experiment for me. Let's put it that way. And I was never thought I'd see myself in any type of white collar profession, let's say. So I finished school, got a trade. I thought, yep, I'm going to be happy doing my trade for the rest of my life. And that's what I'll do, stay in that industry. But I moved into education through a number of different ways. And for me, I like to be challenged. And I found that I've been in education close to 25 years now, or I'm in my 25th year. And I found that education presents those challenges that we need, so we don't get stale in the industry. Have you found that over the years?
Oh, look, it's interesting. We've just recently been to the US, and we went to the I'm not sure of the official title, the African American Museum in Washington DC. And we bought a fridge magnet back, which was something along the lines of, and pardon my lack of accuracy, it was something along the lines of, it's a lot easier to kind of help when they're a child than trying to fix things up when they're an adult. And and I certainly see that is very true, that some of the problems with that we might look around the world with adults, that's certainly a huge issue. particularly at the really difficult end of the spectrum. But if we can make an intervention, maybe when they're younger, and maybe possibility of change, I think that can really yield some really powerful things. And so I think that, I guess, all of us want to think that we've got some purposeful role. And I guess it's tricky in teaching. You never really quite see. It's not like that sliding doors thing where you go, well, I don't know, the Charles Dickens Christmas Tale, where you sort of peel back and you go, oh my goodness, if I hadn't just had that, teaching experience, and this is where my life would have ended. And, maybe it would be really interesting to see that, and think, oh my goodness, if I hadn't invested in that child, then look what, the life of crime and delinquency that would have eventuated. Who knows? But it does strike me that fairly frequently students will come up to teachers and say things like, do you remember when you said blah 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 blah? And these moments seem to have had a weight that quite often the teacher never really appreciated. And I know that for many people, there've been formative experiences growing up where a teacher has kind of stepped into their life, said something profound, done something profound, done a small act of kindness, which may not have meant a great deal in the scheme of things, but for that student, it really was a big deal. And hopefully there's a few of those moments that each of us can string together, whether we're teachers or next door neighbours or, fellow church members or, members of the whatever, that you can do something positive in the life of a young person and possibly really some great outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's those, for the want of a better term, those random acts of kindness of just doing what we love to do and just imparting something into the lives of these young people. And like you said, it might be just a sentence or a statement that we don't put that much weight on, but it has, a tremendous impact. I mean, I remember, that's even happened with educators in my journey. One of the headmasters that we know, I was young and naive, and I was put in a position at the school where I was having to interact with the headmaster quite regularly. And I made a statement that was, not the best way to approach the headmaster. And he was very gracious and kind and put his arm around me and said, now, Philip, that's not the way you make a statement to a headmaster. This is how you should do it. And, he talked to it, and I caught up with him a few years ago, and I recounted this story. And I said, do you remember that? And he goes, I have absolutely no recollection whatsoever. Yeah. And I think that impacted me tremendously. And I can only imagine the life of a young person, how much an arm around the shoulder, a pat on the back, just an encouragement statement will help them on their journey.
Yeah, I mean, I've got friends also who have made fairly significant, career decisions, going down one particular track and they ended up going down another track because of a comment that a person's made. And again, same experience as you. I said to the person who had imparted this profound, life-changing question, do you remember this? No, I have no memory at all. And so I guess that the humbling thing is, and this would be true if, I don't know who your audience is, if it's mainly teachers, but yeah, that word of question, or that word of encouragement, or that, have you ever thought about this? That might have come. I think that's a profound thing, and I hope that each of us takes the opportunity to take up the privilege it is to be involved in the lives of other people, whether that's officially as a school teacher or, one of the great joys that I have in my life is that now that I'm older, and have worked with a number of young teachers, and to catch up with them and say, like, what's happening with your career, or how are you going with that, or if you ever want to discuss any of that. And I love that. And so there are people scattered around the country that I've worked with, and it's a great privilege to, bounce ideas off them, or maybe ask a question, or provide an encouragement. So these are not my students per se, but they're still people that have been placed in my life. And I take that as a great privilege. So teacher of kids, teacher of adults, it's all wonderful and a great privilege.
Yeah, the school ecosystem, it thrives when it's healthy. It thrives when there are statements and discussions like we're talking about. But also, it's not all just light and fluffy and, hey, you're doing a great job, or hey, did you think about it this way? But it's also, I guess, when we can, you and I both have the privilege of being parents, that we can go, hey, you've done the wrong thing here. This is the consequences of it, but we can learn from this. And so we can have, we've had to do that to our children. I've had to do that to my children, many times. I'm sure you've probably had to do it to yours, maybe once or twice. I've met your children; they're wonderful people. But we have those statements, so it's having that honest dialogue and that fairness and justness, sorry, with the students, so that they can actually take on board any sort of constructive criticism that we need to give them. But unless we give them a positive, they won't take on that criticism or the correction that's required. Have you found that in your journey?
Look, I think it's a very interesting one. So I think that we enter into this kind of arrangement at schools where I think a student walks in the gate and expects to be given feedback from a teacher, like, you're not doing this, you should do this. And I think it's a wonderful thing, because I actually think that increasingly that openness to genuine feedback is diminishing. So, for example, and I make no comment about individual schools, I think adults are actually quite harder to give feedback to than kids, because I think a kid walks into the class and says, well, look, you probably know more than me, and, tell me what I don't know and tell me what I can fix. And, that's part of the deal. And so that openness is built into the culture of a school. Whereas I think in a workplace, that's a bit trickier. And one of the challenges as my career has gone on has been, how do you have that similar conversation with an adult who might not come to you with the view that, oh, here I am, I definitely want some feedback, and I definitely am happy to acknowledge that you've got some expertise that I don't have. I'm not sure that adults quickly come to those assumptions. So I think that encouraging growth in adults generally is more difficult. And so I think one of our great challenges is, how do we do that in a meaningful way, where they might not immediately go, yeah, absolutely, tell me how I want to grow. And particularly if you've been teaching for a while, and you and I both, to come and have that curiosity and that sense of, look, what can I learn today, is a bigger step than I think I've realized. And I think that whether it's tiredness, whether it's I don't know, an attitudinal thing, to convince an adult that they need to have some of that childlike kind of openness to feedback, I think is more challenging. It's been one of the parts of my latter career when I spend more of my time trying to kind of interact with adults who then will interact with kids. So I think that's a different dynamic. And I know many school leaders quite enjoy being in the classroom because I think that there's that vibrancy and there's that openness, and probably less politics, that you get when you're in the meeting with the teachers or the executive meeting or whatever it is that you're part of, where there's a bit more politics, there's a little bit, people are a little bit more guarded, and maybe the feedback is a little bit less well received. So I do think there's something special about kids, and that's useful to think about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, the longer where you are in the teaching profession, often just by longevity, you get moved into positions of leadership. And I mean, for me,
it's brilliance. It's not longevity. It's that.
For some, it definitely brilliance.
Yeah.
And the natural knack for administration. I mean, that's a key part of it. I mean, for me, like, I can do it, and I've been in roles where I've been, helping with certain areas of in department issues, ordering and safety and things like that, and then I've helped rebuild departments, and I've helped start a school, and there's all these things that we can do. But I get the joy from And look, it's frustrating at times, don't get me wrong, and as you know, but I get that joy is when you're in the classroom, when you see the lights turn on in the kids, when they're knuckling down, trying to get through a concept, or for me it's in building something or designing something, or understanding a new bit of CAD software, and they're just headbutting the wall, and then all of a sudden it just clicks, and the lights shine, and they get that sparkle in their eye, and then they're just off and running. And I think there's the teachers who like to get back in or want to stay in the classroom. That's why they got into teaching, to for those moments.
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky one because the latter part of my career has been more at that executive level, and you need somebody who's good in that role because you need somebody who's going to deal with a serious child protection issue, and that takes ages. You need somebody who actually understands the school finances and is going to figure out if we're going to be able to pay the bills next week. So those sort of functions that do occupy a lot of the people at the other end of the spectrum, they're really important and often desperately time consuming. And one of the things that I've learned is that it's very hard to see exactly what's taking that up. And you think, why is the principal in their office? What the heck are they doing all of that time? And you think, oh my goodness, so that particular person who they're never allowed to tell the staff about, that's going to take a huge amount of time. Or that particular legal issue which is just blown up is going to take hours and hours and hours. And you do want good people at the top who are looking after those things well, because if they're not looked after, then everything falls apart. But the challenge is, to emerge from that, and I would say for their own well-being, and for mine, to then go into the classroom and go, oh, okay, the reason that I've just been having that conversation with the lawyer, or the reason that I've just been having that, fairly difficult spreadsheet conversation about how we're going to afford this, that, and the other, that is so this can happen. And that these children can continue on with their learning, that this teacher can get on with it and not have to worry about whatever else is going on. And so I think for leadership, trying to connect enough with that you remember what it's all about, rather than the stuff at the pointy end, which is often what takes up a lot of the time, which is hard. And I do see the cost, and I am genuinely worried about the next generation of leaders, because I think to be in a senior executive position at school is super difficult. And I see increasingly the cost, the toll. And you and I can all think of leaders over over our time who have been really worn down by that experience. And now I'm actually seeing less and less people interested who are like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And I think, yeah, fair enough.
Oh, it makes absolute sense. And on that, just looking at, there was one of your roles where you were doing the reviewer of teaching practice over in the
Oh,
UK.
yeah.
So you were, just from skimming it, you were looking at educators and the people being educated and how that all goes to work. Is that where your, I guess, journey started with this type of thinking? And because from there you moved into that executive role. You've stayed in the classroom, but you've moved into a more executive role. Was there something there, or was there a praxis point that I want to use what I have, my skills, my resources to help the school, but to help the students and those teachers coming through?
Yeah, look, I think that, well, so for my career, I think it was expertise in the subject area first. So my first master's was in history, and then it was trying to understand how my personal faith connected with basically my life and my work, and so that was the Masters of Theology. But then the latter one was, okay, so if I am to be a teacher, what is the good teaching actually look like, and what do I need to be aware of, and what does it mean to do education well? And so that's been the latter part of my interest. And so the roles reflect an interest in and a passion in exploring those questions. and not just in an academic sense, and in a sense of, well, okay, how can I use that in a leadership role? And for me, perhaps the part, well, I think everything's pastoral, but it was more in the end of leadership of teaching and learning. And so the last couple of roles have been all about trying to think about what are the things that promote and help learning to flourish, and how can I be a part of that. So that was both an intellectual quest, the study, but also in terms of a practical, how can we actually improve that. So, for example, the review of teaching practice was super interesting, because that was that was the Department of Neurology, actually, who were interested in their online offering. And so that was, how do we help students who are interacting with this course content from all around the world to really access this in a meaningful way. And so I don't know anything. I mean, it was really for doctors doing neurology courses, but I was invited in as a sort of the education person. And so we were kind of like, okay, so this is how I'm accessing this platform. What do you think? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And so applying what I know about effective teaching and learning, and applying what I know about observing teaching and learning to a thing which I didn't really know a whole lot about, which is neurology, and then giving feedback for the improvement of that course. And so that fed into that particular work, and that improved that. And the neurologist who was the team leader, ended up getting some award because of the online offering, which is wonderful for him. But I guess that was all about what can we do to improve the conditions of learning. And I guess that's been the rest of my career. What can we do to improve the conditions of learning? And sometimes that's really cool, in terms of observing. I really genuinely like observing a lesson and giving a teacher feedback on that. That's a super fun part of my role. And sometimes that's like, all right, well, how do you fill out the necessary compliance material so that you can get it done easily? And that's not super fun, but it also is important and gets done. And if you can help people to do it effectively, then it's a win.
Yeah, we just went through a NCCD audit, so yeah, it's not fun. It's critically important, but to be shown how to do it effectively makes the task a lot easier to handle, and to the point of actually understanding why we're doing this. Because a lot of the time, it's us teachers, we do stuff. We're told do this busy work. It's important, but it's not actually explained why it is important. It's just get it done.
Yeah, look, and I think the worst phrase you ever want to hear, I mean, let me say, most organisations, but certainly teaching, is, oh, that's just a box ticking exercise. And as soon as your activity becomes quote unquote a box ticking exercise, then it's game over. Because what people are effectively saying is, this is stupid, this has no inherent value, and I'll do whatever I can to achieve minimal compliance, but that's it. Now, that is super unhelpful. And if what you're doing is that, like, it's very bad. And so I think the challenge for anyone in administration is, as you've articulated, is tell me what the reason for this is. Give me the rationale for spending any time at all on this particular thing, and specifically give me a reason to do it properly. And then if it's not done properly, show me how that's actually a legitimately bad thing, not just annoying some bureaucrat who doesn't deserve my respect. So, for example, NCCD, you've got to do that well, because there's a lot of government money that is attached to those things. So if that's a box ticking exercise, fine, but at its very heart, it's trying to ensure accountability for the massive amounts of money that are being spent. And if you screw that up, or if those funds are being spent inappropriately, what it potentially means is you've got a kid with legitimate needs who is not having them met because there's no money left, because the money got squandered because somebody wasn't accountable. So I guess it's the role of leadership to really explain the why, the Simon Sinek, explain the why, or and then help people to make that not as onerous. And for those people out there who might be brilliant at a spreadsheet, or might have real skills in developing systems or whatever, they are incredibly powerful, because there are genuine people who all they want to do is help kids, but are rubbish at spreadsheets, can't fill out documents, And if there are people out there with the skills to make that process quicker, that's wonderful. And full credit to them for all of their work. And so I think that education has it's I guess, a broad church in the sense of it invites a whole bunch of skills. And if you can help that box ticking, tedious administration thing to become a meaningful exercise that doesn't take a huge amount of time, then full credit. That's not really my skill set, but to involve people. I mean, we're doing a work management system at the moment. It's not a sexy piece of project, but I genuinely believe if this can save a whole bunch of people some time that they can then spend giving feedback to kids or building relationships with their classes instead of wrestling with forms that are hard to complete, that's a wonderful thing. And so I'm really grateful when the IT team can swing into action about that. So that's the cool thing about education. Like, it's a fairly broad field with lots of different moving parts and lots of different skills to be drawn on.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're talking about the monetary value and how critical it is, and if it's not done correctly, some will miss out. And like, our leadership team were so transparent in explaining, okay, this level of child gets, well, every child gets X amount, then this level gets this much more, and then this level gets this much more. So these are the stakes that we're playing with.
Yeah.
This is a teacher, like, if we lose 2 children, or if the funding doesn't go through for whatever reason, then that's a teacher's job. It's as simple as that. But it's also more importantly, it's the students missing out on the help that they require.
Yeah.
So, and again, good leadership will go, this is really important. We're going to help you do it. We're going to do, if you do it this way, we're going to show you how to do it. We're going to try and make it easier for next time. Give us some good feedback. And I think that's critical, because the communication was there. So, and that's to your point of the explanation, the justification, and the support to get so that you remove it's a box ticking exercise.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm not sure how NAPLAN went with you guys this week, but look,
probably like the rest of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious about that, because I do remember when NAPLAN came in, and it was really about providing accountability, that that every school would go through this kind of national testing system, which would then be published, and you would all be able to know how's the school going, and this was informing choices, and you could say to your school, oh, the NAPLAN results aren't so good, what's going on? But unfortunately, this week we've seen, if the IT infrastructure is not up for it, again, I don't know what happened, but there were all sorts of issues with access to the NAPLAN online testing. Like that adds a significant administrative toll. So I get the why. In this case, the accountability. Okay, sure. If this is what is useful, maybe. But that team of people who make that a reasonable kind of execution, and in this case, it just didn't work. And so I feel for that team, because you really want to be invisible in that process. You just want everything to work seamlessly. And so again, there's a whole bunch of industries that have kind of emerged alongside education, in this case, kind of online testing companies. And so again, a wonderful opportunity for people with skills in that area who might not be teachers in front of the classroom. But if you can design a platform where effectively students can interact, and we can provide fantastic resources for schools and teachers without kind of some of the hiccups that we experienced this week, that's fantastic. And so again, I think that the possibility for making a difference in education extends quite broadly, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. And the world that we're living in requires that interaction with computer-based technology. We've all got learning management systems, and we've all got our databases, and we've got to access those, and they are built by, and I know some of them are built by teachers who love teaching, but go, I love tech, and if I do it this, and then they can build that sort of stuff in to help their colleagues. So yeah, there's in education, there's enough scope and enough, I get, pegs that you can throw out that are going to land somewhere and secure something in. So
yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm noticing a real kind of retro movement. I mean, my daughter's just bought a flip phone that does virtually nothing. And I've now got kids in my classes saying, "Can I please use an exercise book, not a laptop?" And I'm like, "Okay." So I'll be very curious to see how where that all goes, because my sense is that the tide is turning in some of those regards. And now, I mean, again, I don't know if you can remember when smartphones first came out, and everyone's like, "Oh my goodness, why are we not letting kids use phones in the class? Such a wonderful teaching resource, blah, blah, blah." Now I can't think of a single school that's trying to let kids use phones in the class. And I'm
Yeah.
curious to know in 5 years' time whether we're going to go, "What, you guys still have laptops in the class? Wow, really?" So I will be very interested to see where all that goes, and overlay that with kind of some of the interesting things about AI. I think we live in very interesting times.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. And look, I am seeing the pendulum swing that other way. Like, you know, people talk, having two phones, having the flip phone for their communication, so they can send their text, so they can answer the call, having their smartphone that's so that they got Google Maps, so they can still stick it in their car. Because who wants to, we can't drive around with the director on our lap anymore and keep spinning it around when you get lost. But yeah, I think the pendulum is swinging to go, well, technology has a place, but it can't be the highest place. It needs to be, you know, there are more effective ways of teaching and learning than a screen. And we're starting to see the impacts of, the 20 somethings, the impact that it's having on them mentally, socially, emotionally, from all the time that they were allowed to unfettered screen and access to all this sort of stuff. So it's
Yeah.
it's interesting. I've noticed in your, and look, I know you, so this question sort of comes, you know, from an understanding of you. But for those who don't know you, a lot of your language has, you've talked about, church and history and theology, and so how, I know you have your own personal belief system in the Christian faith, but how has that impacted and driven? Because I know you were director of Christian studies and studies of religion. How does that reconcile with stuff that sometimes is in the syllabus or in the curriculum that go, how do I move through this situation but still stay true to me, but hold fast to the education principles that we need to pass on to the students?
I think if you want to be challenged as a teacher, I think there's a couple of teachers that are on the bottom rung of the teaching ladder. I think the casual teacher is at the bottom rung of that. So, kids will rip apart the casual teacher. I think often in many schools, the scripture teacher or the religion teacher. And so I think that some of the credibility that you might get in other subjects, you sometimes don't get in the subjects that I've been teaching. So if you have a religious school that teaches maths and science and all the rest of it, but then they go, "Oh, by the way, as part of the deal here, you have to do this religious subject," you often don't get the buy-in that might automatically accrue to other subjects. And depending on your parent body, you might not get "Well, have you done your Christian studies homework?" "I don't care, whatever." "Have you done your maths homework?" And so I think my experience in teaching that reminded me that, look, you really have to be on your game, because otherwise I'll rip you apart. And so in many ways, it sharpened my engagement with, the discourse about teaching and learning, because I knew that I couldn't get away with being sloppy in a subject that people didn't value necessarily as much. And so I was always of the view that if you're teaching religious studies or Christian studies in a context where people don't inherently value it, you're going to have to be one of the better teachers in the school, because, you might get away with walking into a maths classroom and say, "Well, today we're doing probability and, let's do exercise 12B or whatever," and be slightly on the boring side. And kids will kind of crank through it, whereas they weren't going to go crank through it, learning about the book of Acts or, Mark's gospel. And so I had to be really on my game. Otherwise, like, forget this, we're out of here. So that, in many ways, that was the kind of the prompt for me to thoughtfully engage in teaching learning. The education studies I did weren't. I mean, they're at UCL in the UK, not particularly a religious organisation by any regards. So that was just okay. I saw a need. If you want to communicate with kids in a subject where they're not necessarily engaging, and you have to be really good at it, and so that was a driver of that. But I do think that one of the central impulses of Jesus was the idea of service, and so on the door of my classroom is etched, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." That's Mark 10:45. Now, I think ultimately, a Christian would say that his biggest act of service was, dying on the cross for sin, which we celebrate at Easter, and that, that's a one-off. That's not what everyone can do. But certainly the idea of modeling service came at the heart of the message of Jesus. So I think that any person who takes the name of Jesus has to have serving others as a fairly high priority for them. And so for me, as a teacher who's also a Christian, that is a big deal to me. And so the concept that what I'm here to do is serve others, in this case as a teacher, is one of the significant motivations for me. And I think personally that's a motivation, but I also think that does shape the curriculum in a way. And there's some really interesting work about the curriculum decisions that can be made because of a different worldview. And so perhaps one of the most, I think the article I found the most interesting was a guy from Calvin College, David Smith, who's a language teacher and effectively wrote about, the purposes of a second language, which I never thought about really. And so he asked the question like, well, why are you learning a language? Is it to get a coffee at a ski resort in France or wherever? Is it to walk into, a hotel and get a really good deal because you speak their local language? Or is it actually to be able to serve those potentially in your community at home? And I found that really challenging to say, what is the point of teaching this? Is this all about you meeting your needs and exploiting, your whatever for your sake? Or is it actually about developing some tools to serve other people? And I think that provides the motivation for learning, but also in some does the context. So, for example, I think for me, probably learning Nepalese is probably the most important language I can learn, not because I'm going to visit Nepal, but because the people who don't speak English around me are Nepalese, and that's the cleaning staff at my school.
Okay.
So if I'm thinking to myself, okay, what language should I learn, rather than okay, where am I going to travel as a tourist? I'll go there. Maybe the answer should be, well, who do I know that doesn't speak English well, and maybe I could learn that language, even if it's not a travel language. And I found that quite confronting to kind of flip the purpose. Am I learning maths simply to kind of be able to exploit the tax code, or am I learning maths to be useful? And I think that it does shape the curriculum in a significant way. And so I think that kind of heart of service is, I'd like to say, part of what motivates me. And I think ultimately I'd like to see curriculum and pedagogical decisions that reflect the building the capacity to serve in my students. Now, at the end of the day, if they end up being horrible people, there's only so much you can do. But hopefully we've created the conditions to equip them. They've got the skills to do stuff. And also in a way which inclines them towards service rather than necessarily selfish ends. So I think that's a profoundly Christian education, I think. And then to ask the big questions. So, today I was teaching a studies religion class and we were talking about Islam. And so, these are serious questions that people are wrestling with. What is the nature of God? How do I know about reality? What is important in history? These are some of the biggest questions that people in the world have ever asked. And I think to engage people with how that has been answered is really, really cool. And I think teaching religion or philosophy or any of those sorts of things ask some very big questions, which I'd like to think our students have engaged meaningfully with, and therefore when they have to make a big ethical decision or have to, consider what is the purpose of my life or any of those biggies, that at least we've given them a little bit of an experience in what that would look like, and hopefully help them to come to more thoughtful conclusions in those areas. And so that's been kind of interesting as part of the teaching areas that I've been involved with.
That's there's so much that we could just continue on that, Van. We could probably talk for another hour just on learning a language, not to travel. But like I've never thought about it that way. Like, I've learned little bits of conversational, so I can get a coffee, so I can get a beer, so I know where the bathroom is, or when I've traveled. But I've never thought about, okay, who's around me that doesn't speak English? I'm going to learn their language so I can help them in whatever aspect, and even in just in inclusion. Hey, you're not alone, and I think that's part of the way what we deal with these kids every day. Is like, you're not alone. You everyone is here. We are a community together, and I think if we look through those lens of service, I think that makes a tremendous difference. And you see, I mean, a lot of the leadership philosophies that are going around is, hey, you've got to be you've got to lead from the back. You've got to support. You've got to, if you're too big to vacuum, then you're too small to lead, type of thing. There's all those things. So yeah, you've given me some food for thought, 100%. But then you look at the critical thinking aspect. We were talking earlier, and you mentioned having some conversations about correcting certain behaviors, or imparting. How have you thought about doing it this way? Have you thought about doing it that way? But giving those critical skills and having those tough conversations about what the world that we live in, and the uncertainty that these students and young men and women are facing on a daily basis, because they're bombarded with noise. And so I guess to be able to sit down and have some of those conversations, or at least embark on them in a healthy way, must be it's a tremendous opportunity.
Oh, yeah, and look, I remember I had one student, and this was in a history class, who said, "Thanks for helping me to think," and I took that as a massive compliment, because that's what I'm trying to achieve. Now, I think we were talking about the French Revolution, or maybe something like that, and I don't know how he was a pretty smart kid, so I don't know how he went in the exam. But if he said to me, "Mr. Broadbent, I really want to thank you. Last year I got 80% for history, and this year I got 85%. That's a really big improvement. I really appreciate that." I mean, look, I'll take that. Happy with that. Or even, "Thanks so much for teaching me. I got into a really hard to get into degree with, because you taught me this, and then I got that mark for this subject, which added to my ATAR, which was really amazing. So thanks." Look, I'll definitely take that. And, but I think the idea that you've helped me to really ask good questions, and I can now look at life, politics, society, my job, whatever, in a critical way. And I don't mean negative, I just mean careful and thoughtful. I think that's a wonderful gift. And I think if education does that, that's pretty amazing. My fear is that it's interesting, went to UCL, that's, Jeremy Bentham is literally, his kind of stuffed head is at the entrance to the college. I walk past it, what is that? And you go up to the library, and it's his head shrunken. And he was, founder of utilitarianism, etc. So I do get that so many people approach education with all right, well, the goal here is to get a high mark so I can go to university, blah, blah, blah. But along the way, if we can produce profound, good, critical thinkers, I think all of society benefits. And if every teacher who's helped a kid to think a little bit more carefully, that's a win. And so I think that Absolutely, schools are about critical thinking. I don't think it's interesting. I think the kind of the little bit of the debate, the knowledge versus skills thing, I think is interesting. Um, and I am convinced that you need both. So I'm not saying we don't need to know things, the facts, all that sort of stuff, because I think that's the raw material for the critical thinking. But I think if the goal is simply to kind of absorb, regurgitate, but without critical thinking, then we really miss an opportunity as schools. And I think ultimately we impoverish the world in which we unleash these kids into. Because, these are the kids who are going to be making decisions about, whether we go to war or not, what we do with the climate or not, whether we choose this technology or that technology, what laws we should pass, and all that sort of stuff. And by goodness, we really want those kids to be doing well in that. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
Yeah, critical thinking and robust discussion, I think, is something that has been lost over the years. The ability to have a strong discussion, a disagreement, argument, even, but still remain polite and cordial at the end of it all, and go, "Hey, that was great. I've learned something. You've learned something. I still believe what I believe, but it has that ability to reinforce your belief system to help you either strengthen your argument, strengthen your thought process and your critical thinking, but it also broadens your scope to greater than you. Like back to your statement about what can I do to help those around me. A good discussion and the ability to think critically will help those around you.
Yeah, look, and much has been made of the kind of the echo chambers that exist. So it's interesting. I'm a late comer to this, but I've recently discovered Instagram, um, and and honestly, the my feed is filled with small brown poodles because that is exactly I have a small brown poodle. I love her very much, and I'm a sucker for small brown poodle anything on Instagram. So if there is a cute little brown poodle reel, I'm up for it. And so I think Instagram has very quick. Honestly, I've been on it for about a month. Instagram has very quickly learned, okay, Doug wants the poodles. He doesn't care about the Labradors, as cute as they are. He's really not into any of the big dogs, so don't bother with that sort of stuff. And so I've seen in real time how quickly the algorithms learned. But I do think schools provide a wonderful opportunity because they are still generally reasonably broad places, and that because of the nature of our curriculum, and we expect kids to learn a bit of history and a bit of geography, and most states have mandatory components for a range of subjects. I think we do force a breadth that they wouldn't otherwise get. And so previously, I think when you'd have to log into not log in, you'd have to turn the dial on I remember the rotary dial on the television. We had an RCA, I think that's a brand. And literally to change the channel on our TV, you clicked a dial. Um, and and so you just couldn't go down that kind of narrow niche because there just wasn't access to that. And my parents spent a small fortune getting Encyclopedia Britannica, which they bought at the Easter show, and we had that, and that was the font of all knowledge. But now I think that the opportunity just to kind of enter that silo is greater, but schools are still not that place. And that we do force the kid who doesn't love geography to do it in year 7 or 8. We do force the kid who has no interest in history to do a bit of history. We do force the drama person to do a little bit of maths, all that sort of stuff. And I think that schools do remain a place where the structures and the syllabi generally force a broader view for kids. And I think that does make schools a bit of a special place where we can continue to offer that, resist the silos just for a little bit longer for the students. And if they want to go home and spend 8 hours a night on Fortnite or whatever they do, okay. But at the very least, when they rock up at school the next day, they're not going to be playing another 8 hours of Fortnite. They're going to be doing something else. And Fortnite, I mean, if you're a professional gamer, good for you, well done. But at least at school, we offer a variety, and I think that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in your current role as the acting director of teaching and learning, and you're
Mhm.
at quite a prestigious school, well-renowned school. Does how how is that role implemented? Like with everything that we've discussed, from when you started teaching to now, and the implementation of curriculum and the changes that are ever evolving, and the amount that's forced into the curriculum is a big conversation at the moment, that we almost don't get to do the teaching that we want to do because there's so much just information that we're trying to get to these kids. How do you balance that, or how do you help teachers balance that? Because I'm sure you have many conversations with frustrated teachers going, I just can't keep up. There's just too much.
Look, I think you need to be really careful to understand what you need to actually teach. And my observation is that I think many teachers assume you have to know more information than possibly you do. So I actually think there is room in the curriculum. Now it depends on who you are. I think the maths teachers tend to be a little bit more opposed to that because we've got to get through factorization because tomorrow's trigonometry. And I do see that the crowded curriculum, and at least in New South Wales, there have been attempts to sort of uncrowd the curriculum. But I actually think teachers secretly like it because that's an area where they've got expertise. Because if the answer is, oh my gosh, I've got 400 facts to tell you today, come on, I think that's a space where teachers can be pretty comfortable. Oh, I've got this amazing PowerPoint, but we're just going to have to, kids, we're just going to have, no time for questions, kids. The PowerPoint, we've got to get through this, baby. Otherwise, we're not going to be ready for the exam. So just shut up and let's go. So, because if you say to the teacher, actually, you really only got one thing, just help them to understand it well. I think that's actually a harder job. So I wonder, I'm kind of, this is a working hypothesis. I haven't really thought this one through, but I wonder how much I've got to get through the content is just really a mask for, I don't really know how to engage you in this, so I'm just going to pile on information because I think that's actually slightly easier teaching. So to having a rich, robust conversation that promotes deep understanding, and I'm conscious of the word deep because that has connotations depending on your educational philosophy. I think a rich and robust conversation that maybe has a few less facts is actually harder to do. And so I suspect that's maybe, working hypothesis, maybe one of the reasons why teachers love all the facts, because it's relatively straightforward.
That look, we're peeking behind the curtain here for because you see it on a daily basis, and look, I'd love to explore that more. I reckon we could probably talk for about another hour on that, but I don't think we should because it's a school night. So
Yeah, and look, don't hear me say I don't believe in knowledge. And I think one of my favorite authors at the moment is Daisy Christodoulou, and her book 7 Myths About Education is fantastic. And one of the myths is it's all about skills, and I think that's profoundly wrong. And I do think that if you don't know anything, you can't engage in any conversation about anything. And so I absolutely believe that it's imperative that, for example, in the subject of history, you just do need to know dates and names, right? Because if you are getting mixed up about, so which is the Treaty of Versailles, is that World War I or II? If you don't know the answer to that, then that's a big problem. And therefore, any kind of critical thinking you might be doing is going to be deeply flawed. So I do think you need to know a bunch of stuff. But I think trying to figure out when you can press, and let's talk about exploring that concept, and when you can actually say, okay, we do need just to crank through the information. That's a hard thing, and I think teachers will come at different ends. I'm certainly not at the knowledge is nothing. You can look everything up. It's all about the skills. That's not me. But I do think the big challenge is to say, all right, well, given the whatever you think is necessary to learn, how can we do that in a way which promotes real understanding and, dare I say, encourages critical thinking? as opposed to we don't have time to think about this, let's just move to the next bullet point, which I think can sometimes happen.
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it? And like in a subject that I teach, so in design and technology and industrial technologies and things like this, where we're working with concepts beyond school, we're teaching them in school, but we're getting them ready for work outside of school. I don't like the term real world, because if we're teaching them for real world, what are we in? So but we're teaching them these skills, but we're giving them the knowledge. And if I don't show them how to do something, if I don't explain how a piece of equipment works, whether it's a manual tool or a CAD software, if I don't explain it and give them the knowledge for it, then they cannot gain the skill. But they can't have the skill and then learn the knowledge, because it's that there has to be a crossover. It can't be one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, for example, the maths teachers will tell you, absolutely, we need to cover this, that, and the other, and I think it's absolutely right, because without knowledge, you're just kind of randomly stumbling around. And I think often some of the exceptional children can actually get to a place where they can figure stuff out, and it's a much more rewarding experience. But I think that there's certainly been done some harm in some of the more extreme ends of that inquiry process, where kids are kind of left alone to figure stuff out a little bit. And I think that, like all things, the pendulum has swung back a little bit. And maybe we're all going to be talking about how much there's two-direct instruction tomorrow, and how there's zero inquiry in schools. And I'm sure that, depending on where you sit on that spectrum, you probably have a view about that one.
Oh yeah, and look, you and I and many other teachers have been around long enough to know that some of these new theories that are coming out are just rebranded things that we've done in the past, that all of a sudden it's new and it's exciting and it works. And it's like, well, yeah, it worked back then, but they stopped doing it because it was it was too much inquiry. It was not enough inquiry. I had quite an interesting disagreement with one of a colleague that I worked with up here on the Gold Coast. They were doing an inquiry-based project, which I think are fantastic, because it helps the critical thinking skills. But what I was trying to explain to this teacher is you can't just let them have at it. I said, you've got to teach them. You've got to show them how to ask a question. You've got to show them what the question needs to be, or how to phrase a question to get the information that they need to gain the skills that they want. She said, no, you just give them the broad question and they'll work it out. And I'm just like, no, it doesn't work that way, because they don't know how to ask the tough questions. They don't know how to critically think 4 steps ahead. They need to work. And it was really interesting to see that. And we know there's a big push for inquiry-based learning, PBL, and step away from the direct instruction. But I think you can't have one and you can't have the other. You need to have both at any particular time, sometimes even in the same lesson.
Yeah, and look, I think that's the pendulum. When I was at school in the 70s, yep, that was a time. When I was at school in the 70s, I went to an open plan school with it was contract based, and I was 7, 8. And so that was, so that was mid 70s New Zealand. And so I think that, yeah, you're right. And I think that, the challenge of education is the pendulum is swinging backwards and forwards all the time. And hopefully, you happen to be at the moment where it's kind of in the middle before it goes to the excesses. And I think that's the challenge. And to be honest, as a sort of a professional learning guy, that's the real challenge, because there's a real level of cynicism that kind of creeps into education when you've been around the block a few times. So I remember attending one PD. Oh gosh, I would have been a teacher for about 15 years. And this is when all the effect sizes all came in. So Hattie and Denham and all those guys. And they kind of listed off basically all the stuff that I used to be really into. So, learning style's garbage, class sizes makes no difference, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, wow, like just about everything that I thought was important is garbage. It's 2.0 or it's a 0 or whatever it is. And it's interesting, because I think part of the issue with research is, how do you present that in a way which doesn't make people think, okay, well, next year it's going to be the opposite? I remember when our oldest, he's 27, our obstetrician said, share a bottle of wine between you, it's fine. I'm like, okay. Our views on, how much consumption of alcohol, it's good for you, it's bad for you, it's good for you, it's bad for you. And I think that's the same in education. Our direct instruction is the worst. No, it's the best. No, it's the worst. Sorry, hang on, what is it again? And I think that the challenge is helping teachers to navigate that space in a way that doesn't make them deeply cynical and just give up and just go, well, I don't care, because the last person who used the word evidence informed or research based or whatever told me A, and the next person who used pretty much the same phrase told me B, and they're completely different. So what am I supposed to do with that? And so that's a trick. And I think that the role of good educational research is to help people to make sense of that debate, and not just to give up and go, well, you guys never agree, I'm just going to do my own thing.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's like that old thing where 87% of all statistics are made up.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It's like what is right, what is right, and I think in the classroom, what's right is sometimes what works for the students in your room at that time.
Look, and I think this. Yeah, sorry, Phil.
If you're helping them get to their next level of success, whatever success may look like, and I don't label what it is, but it's whatever their success may look like. If we can help them do that, then I think as educators, we've done our job. Yeah,
and I as a person in leadership, I think one of the most difficult things is what is unique to this teacher, this class, this school, and what is generalizable. And the same is true of my research. So my my doctorate is qualitative research, and very carefully, many qualitative, they'll have a little like limitations of the study thing, and it's like, yeah, we don't want to generalize, we got to, this applies here and more studies need to be done, blah blah blah, because I think we're attuned to the idea that it's very difficult to say that what I've just discovered for this particular group of kids is true of every other kid in the universe. And so I think research has got justifiably much more cautious with that one. So my particular research is on like conceptions of collaboration. And so the work is on, how do teachers conceive collaboration? And I'm going to say, look, it's quite possible that teachers in other countries or other schools or other systems think completely differently about collaboration, but this is the data set that I've got. So I think research has got more cautious, but I think as a leader, it's tricky because a teacher could say, well, let me just pick a random example. It's probably not a real one. I don't think uniforms are appropriate in my class. So what we're going to do is we're not going to obey the uniform code in my class because I think it inhibits learning. And then the other teacher goes, hang on, why don't they have to have uniforms? Oh, no, but my class is different to your class. And so I think that as a trivial example, if one teacher exercises their own autonomy and their own highly context-specific judgment about a class, okay, in many ways, oh, you're good for you, well done, you're thinking about your kids, their context, that sort of stuff. But it does make being part of a system or a school or even a class really difficult. And so I think one of the great challenges of any leadership is where is their autonomy and where is there not? I was having a conversation with some English teachers, and they have different I don't know if you've heard of Peel. It's a paragraph structure. Some people use that. Some people use another one called Petal. There's another one that other people use. And I'm like, okay, at what point do we need to say this is how you write a paragraph? And at what point do you say, whatever? And I think that's really tricky because I think teachers and students love autonomy. In my class is what we do. But at what point do we need to say, well, that might be true of your class, but because that kid goes to another class, we've got to have a level of consistency here. And I 100%. Think what needs to be consistent, that's tricky. Because this teacher likes it a bit loose, this teacher likes it a bit free-flowing, this teacher likes it a bit strict, this teacher likes exercise books, this one likes laptops, blah, 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 blah. And I do think one of the great challenges of leadership is to try and draw the lines that say, okay, you can, how you operate this, we don't care, but this needs to be consistent. And I think that's one of the great battles that any school leader has to face. Where do you say, look, I don't care if that's what you think's best for your class, you're going to do this. And what you go, okay, cool. If it's up to you're the professional in the room, you decide. And I know what the teachers all want. They want to be able to do whatever the hell they want. But at what point, as the school or the department or whatever else you're in charge of, do you say, in this faculty, in this school, in this state, and whatever it is, we will do this? And that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a daily challenge for you by the sounds of it. Because you want to give your teachers autonomy, and teachers thrive, and I think people in general thrive in their chosen profession when they are trusted to do their job. But then there's also, I can't let my kids run riot in my workshop because that's just a recipe for disaster. So I need to make sure that there are very strict guidelines in my particular classroom. I can have autonomy, but there's got to be rules. And these kids go, but I learn best when I've got my shirt hanging out and I'm yelling across the room.
Yeah,
that doesn't work there because we're in a community here, and your behaviour is going to affect someone else, and it could affect them in quite a negative way. And we look at all that sort of stuff. It's like, where does the flexibility and stop, so that because we also have to teach these students that you're going to go into an environment where you're told what to do and you have no choice. And if you don't want to do it, then it's see you later.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the uniform's a classic one because, I've been in context where a parent has said, all you care about is uniforms, you don't care about learning. And so this person's view was that any conversation about whether the shirt should be tucked in is a stupid conversation. That let my child do whatever they want with their uniform because that's not important. And to be honest, I can see the argument. Like, really, having their shirt tucked in helps them to learn. What do you care? Whereas another person might say, oh, look, I actually think that the uniform is important because it's blah, blah. It conveys a sense of pride and it shows self-discipline and blah, blah, blah. And I think that, harking back to what you earlier said, how do you have that conversation that says, no, this is actually important? Or, yeah, fair, we can be flexible up this, I don't really care. And whether it's uniform or, look, lots of things. Anything where you compel somebody to do something they wouldn't choose, you've got to have a pretty good reason that they must be compelled. Like the school I work at, sport is compulsory. What if you don't like sport? What if you think it's useless? And so one of the questions is, okay, will you be prepared to bend on that one? If somebody says, look, my child's particularly gifted as a musician, do we give them exemptions? Some schools do, some schools don't. My child doesn't like camps. At what point do you say they don't go on camp? They do go on camp. And that's really tricky because I think part of an educator is to sort of go, okay, let me see if I can understand this particular child in this particular context. And how do I make a decision about whether or not we're pushing them too far on this thing or whether or not this is a healthy challenge? So I do know a musician kid who played rugby and got really badly hurt. And I'm like, oh gosh, this kid was made to play sport and it ended up kind of badly for them. So did we do the wrong thing? How many kids really shouldn't have gone on camp because the experience was so traumatic? I don't know. And I think that's the space many educators find themselves in, is trying to assess whether or not this particular child or this particular class can be exempt from whatever is the normal practice. And I think that's really difficult to do. And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't.
Yeah, absolutely. It's education. It's not a game for the weak-hearted. That's for the faint-hearted. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But there are so many joys and so many wins that we get to see daily, and there's so many wins that often we don't see until years later, where we run into that student who we may have forgotten, but they come up and go, "Oh, do you remember when?" Or, "Hey, Mr. Broadbent, Mr. Murdoch, and they have this, they don't remember a thing we taught them, in the content that we taught them, but they remember, hey, you actually looked after me, you cared for me, you brought joy into my day, so and helped them to become a better person. So we've all had that joy and that privilege. So
Yeah, and look, and again, I hope that everybody has the experience of finishing their workday and wherever they found themselves. I mean, none of my kids have gone into teaching, and I hope that they go, "Wow, I did something important today, and I made a contribution. The world is slightly better because of what I did today." And I think teaching can maybe be a bit obvious, and I'm full credit to the nurses and the doctors out there and police people. I mean, gosh, to wade into a potentially lethal situation day in, day out and deal with humanity often at its worst. I mean, man, to be a positive influence in that thing, though, the police, far out, they're incredible people. So we all have a job to play, and look, I don't have the skills or the temperament to be a police officer, but I'm glad that I can be somewhat usefully employed somewhere else.
yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad that those police officers and everyone else can be employed doing what they do, and I think that's a function of a healthy society. So
yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
glad we're a part of it. Yeah, mate, Doug, we've been chatting for ages, and like I said, look, it's a school night, but more importantly, I respect your time, and you have a big job to do day in, day out, and you're doing your doctorate as well. So you got that, and you've got your family time. So I've got two last questions for you before we wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
First one is, what you've listed many challenges over, and you've made me think, which is awesome, and I thank you for that. But for everyone who's listening, what, as an educator, as a leader, yourself, what could be a challenge that you'd put out to our teachers who are listening?
Be intentional.
Show up to the point. Yeah, absolutely. Be intentional.
Just so I'll try. Two words: be intentional. Whatever you're going to do, have a reason for it, and give a little bit of thought. Now, I just came off our professional learning morning, and had a lovely conversation with the teacher, and she said, "Oh, I mean, I think it reflects what we do in the class, but it helped me to really think about why I did that." And I thought, "Oh, that's the total." So I fear that when I was first a teacher, I got people to write a Socrates quote on their exercise books, which was, "The unexamined life is not worth living," and I think that kind of harks back to my be intentional. So do whatever you do, but be prepared to give a reason for it. And if in searching for that reason you can't find one, then probably don't do it. Be intentional.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Actually, I just thought of one other question that I do definitely need to ask you. But prior to that, is if now we connected again through LinkedIn, but we've we've got other connections where we can get in contact with each other. But if someone wanted to reach out to you, talk to you more about the things you do, or get some advice from you, what would be perhaps the best way in not necessarily, I don't want private emails, but what would be a good way? Would LinkedIn be the best way
Probably
to reach
LinkedIn.
out?
And just write, if I've never, just write you can write an introduction, even if you've got the free account, which is what I do. Hey Doug, saw you on this, interested to explore that. Yep, then you're more likely to get a response. If it's just some random LinkedIn to invite, I don't really know if you've clicked on 1,000 people today. So I'll generally not respond to kind of random requests. But if you've written something in LinkedIn that says, "Hi, I saw you on Phil's podcast, interested to chat to that," yeah, that'd be fun.
Brilliant. Well, I'll throw your your LinkedIn profile onto the show notes.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
And look, the last question now, I'm going to have as a guess. I'm not going to say it, but I've got my thought, but I could be wrong. I couldn't let you go from the Tattoo Teacher podcast without asking you, Doug, do you have any tattoos?
Well, that's a sore point in the family, actually, Phil, I got to tell you. Because all my flipping children get tattoos to honor their mother. and there's no tattoos to honor their father. So both of my sons have flipping butterfly tattoos on them. So does my wife. And so there's this little butterfly tattoo cult in our household, which I'm not wild about. And then my daughter, of all people, who doesn't have a butterfly tattoo, is, Mum, can I get a tattoo with you? I'm like, are you kidding me? So if one of the kids says to me, Dad, let's go get matching tattoos, I don't care if it's the ugliest tattoo in the world on my forehead, I'm probably going to say yes. But at this moment, the answer, sadly, is no. I'm not part of the cool club. So I live in the inner west and I don't have heaps of tattoos, so I feel a bit of a fraud.
You're far from a fraud, Doug. You've got the silver hair, you've got the round rimmed glasses, so you're all over it.
Yeah.
And as long as you wear a pair of Birkenstocks on the weekend, you'll be set. So
yeah, that's true. And ironically, I'd have to wear them ironically though.
yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's how we roll. Yeah.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it. Thank you for your wisdom, your knowledge, your insights, and for sharing them with us today.
Yeah, Phil, look, I think good conversation done well is just a beautiful thing. And so thank you for the wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Well, you have a wonderful evening, and we'll catch up again soon.
Cool. Awesome. All right. See you later, Phil.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, it would mean so much to me if you could either like, follow, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The music was by DJ Fruit Salad. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool. Be blessed.